Every state in America has a story that changed in 2025, and today we're covering all 50 of them. In this video, you'll hear one surprising, verifiable fact from every state, each backed by the latest data, that shows how geography, economy, or climate has shifted in ways you might not expect. From billion-dollar wildfire defenses in California to whole neighborhoods sinking into thawing Alaskan ground, these updates reveal where the map is truly being redrawn. We'll move through the states alphabetically, one by one, with quick facts and why they matter. Let's begin with the very first state on our list, Alabama's updated time borders. Alabama stands out for a quirk in timekeeping that doesn't match what most maps show. Officially, the entire state follows Central Time, but in practice parts of eastern Alabama run on a different schedule. Towns like Phoenix City, Valley, Lanett, and Smith Station operate on Eastern Time for everyday life, aligning with nearby Columbus, Georgia. Schools set calendars, businesses open their doors, and residents organize routines to match the economic center just across the Chattahoochee River. For locals, this means Georgia time is not a temporary adjustment but a permanent way of life. The reason is straightforward. Columbus is the region's largest economic hub, and trying to live strictly on Central Time would put these Alabama communities out of sync with their strongest trade, education, and work connections. The result is practical but strange. Workers in Phoenix City might check the same bank hours as their Georgia co-workers, or families might set school schedules 1 hour ahead of the official state time zone. This small detail creates an ongoing situation where the line separating Central and Eastern is not legal but cultural. It's a reminder that political borders don't always match the rhythms of daily life. Beyond time zones, recent shifts in population highlight another side of Alabama's changing geography. Birmingham, long considered the state's economic seat, still carries that reputation, but Huntsville has been one of Alabama's fastest-growing metro areas in recent years, boosted by aerospace and defense industries. The cities around the Gulf Coast, Mobile and much of Baldwin County, report steady inflows of new residents drawn by port jobs and proximity to the water. Meanwhile, many rural interior counties face long-term population losses, producing uneven development when viewed across the whole map. For fact-checking, any firm claim about which city is growing fastest should be based on updated 2025 figures, but the broader trend of uneven population change stands clear. Taken together, Alabama illustrates how surface-level boundaries can look simple but play out messily on the ground. In one corner of the state, the clock ticks to a neighbor's rhythm, while in other regions economic gravity pulls people toward growth corridors or away from hollowed towns. For residents, daily routines, work decisions, and even where people choose to live may not line up neatly with the official lines on paper. That disconnection between what the map shows and how people actually live sets the stage for even more dramatic geographic challenges in other parts of the country. Alaska on melting ground. Entire neighborhoods in Alaska still rest on frozen ground, but in 2025 the stability of that ground is giving way far faster than once measured. Permafrost has always been the foundation beneath homes, roads, and pipelines in the Arctic, but new studies confirm thaw rates that outpace earlier decades. The result is not an abstract geological shift but an everyday problem. Houses tilting as the soil beneath turns to mush, roads splitting apart, and utility lines collapsing under uneven ground. For many families, these changes mean the land itself, not poor construction, creates the greatest risk to staying in place. In Utqiagvik, the northernmost city in the United States, entire blocks now deal with streets that break apart from below. The pavement doesn't fail because of traffic, but because the layer that once held it rigid is softening. Similar problems stretch south to Fairbanks, where sudden sinkholes and warped driveways turn routine maintenance into constant crisis response. Municipal budgets, already stretched thin, now devote large sums to repairs that must be repeated every year. Alongside repair bills, economists warn of another burden: rising condemnation of homes where foundations can no longer be salvaged. leaving owners with properties too costly to fix yet impossible to sell. In smaller indigenous villages, the effects carry far deeper weight. Some residents shift homes manually, moving them in pieces over short distances to outrun advancing ground failure. These actions are not temporary detours. They are desperate attempts to hold on to ancestral lands where families have hunted, buried their relatives, and kept traditions for generations. To leave is not simply a practical relocation. It would sever ties to spiritual and cultural identity. That makes every choice between reinforcing structures or abandoning them a painful struggle that echoes beyond economics. State and federal agencies acknowledge this pressure is not easing. The expectation now is that Alaska will see more cases of large-scale relocation and expensive defensive work in the years ahead. At the same time, homeowners, local councils, and tribal governments face a reality in which basic budgets are drained by repairs, property write-offs, and insurance rates that continue to spike. The ground is not just breaking apart physically, it is breaking the stability of communities, their economies, and their traditions. These cracks in Alaska's foundation show how environmental stress can reshape the very places people call home, a challenge mirrored in other states where survival depends on resources under strain. Arizona's thirst test. Arizona faces a different kind of pressure in 2025. Its water supply is stretched thin, and the strain is shaping how cities and farms survive. The state has long been defined by its battle with scarcity, but now every sector feels the limits. Reservoirs sit lower than past generations remember. The Colorado River no longer provides the cushion it once did, and the result is clear. Federal cuts and local water banking policies are not abstract discussions but daily realities. For both farmers and city leaders, there is less to work with and more at stake. On farmland across central Arizona, irrigation schedules have tightened. Fields that once stayed green throughout long seasons now dry earlier, and many growers switch crops or idle ground altogether. The change is not a voluntary experiment. It is forced by the shrinking supply. Farmers invest in more efficient systems because they must, not because of preference. Yet, just a short drive from these idle acres, neighborhoods keep expanding. Suburbs west of Phoenix, especially in Buckeye and Goodyear, are adding thousands of homes as the construction pace remains among the fastest in the country. New schools, restaurants, and shopping plazas rise almost overnight, promising the comforts of suburban life even as groundwater sources decline. Arizona continues to rank among the fastest-growing states, drawing in residents despite the clear warning signs. This sets up one of the most striking contrasts in the nation. A desert where farmland sacrifices its fields while new housing tracts appear on the horizon. For residents moving into freshly built homes, the tap still flows without interruption. But beneath the surface, utilities juggle competing demands, drilling deeper wells or banking water in underground reserves just to stay ahead of shortages. The balance is precarious. Growth pushes outward, while supply shrinks inward. By 2025, leaders describe the system not as stable but as managed scarcity. The question remains whether the state can keep adding new communities while ensuring long-term security. How can a desert city keep growing when its water margins grow thinner every year? Arizona's attempt to answer that question makes it a test case for the rest of the West, where population growth collides with natural limits. And from here, we shift from a place defined by scarcity to a state where water tells a very different story, one that flows from the ground in a way that feels almost eternal. Arkansas's ancient waters. Arkansas is known for a spring system unlike anywhere else in the country, and in 2025 those waters are drawing more attention than ever. Hot Springs National Park, long a quiet retreat, now ranks among the busiest destinations managed by the Park Service, with annual visitors in the millions. The steady rise in numbers has pushed staffing, trail upkeep, and parking to their limits. For the town surrounding the park, the surge brings constant business for hotels, restaurants, and bathhouses, but it also forces local officials to manage a resource that cannot simply expand to meet demand. The water itself is what makes this site distinct. Unlike volcanic hot springs that emerge from magma-heated chambers, the Ouachita Mountains host a rare process. Rainfall seeps thousands of feet into the ground, warms naturally under pressure and heat from the earth, and then resurfaces through dozens of vents across the park. The result is clear, steaming water that looks ordinary at first glance, but carries a geologic timeline stretching back far before written history. Each pool bubbling at street level represents groundwater filtered, heated, and pushed upward by natural forces that work slowly but ceaselessly. In 2025, park management began new restoration and interpretation programs designed both to protect that fragile hydrologic system and to reframe how visitors experience it. This shift placed Indigenous stewardship at the center of the story. For many native communities, the springs were never just a natural spa but a sacred resource tied to place and heritage. New educational signs and guided talks now share those perspectives directly on site, changing the focus from leisure to layered history. Visitors who might once have come only for a bathhouse tour leave with an impression of cultural depth that stretches beyond mineral waters. Arkansas's bathhouses also carry their own modern legend, drawing early 20th century figures like baseball players seeking recovery seasons and even rumored visits from mob outfits tied to the Prohibition era. Today those echoes form a single detail within a more complex picture, one where historic architecture, growing crowds, and cultural education all converge on the same narrow streets. To keep the springs flowing safely, officials have tightened schedules and access in certain areas. While this frustrates some tourists, the restrictions are part of a deliberate conservation plan. The park now sits at the intersection of mass tourism, cultural recognition, and preservation. Hot springs remains not only a rare natural phenomenon, but also a resource that can endure only if carefully managed. That dynamic, where a natural system must be guarded even as demand rises, mirrors pressing challenges waiting just one state west. California on fire prevention. In California, the question is no longer if wildfires will come, but how to keep small sparks from turning into the next statewide disaster. By 2025, billions of dollars in infrastructure projects are reshaping the grid and land itself. Utilities once known for leaving live wires strung across dry hillsides now bury lines underground where wind and falling branches can't ignite them. Meanwhile, communities are carving permanent fire breaks to separate neighborhoods from surrounding brush. These changes reflect a larger shift in thinking. Fires are not just inevitable events, but risks that can be contained with deliberate design. Technology has also become part of this defense. New remote sensing and early detection systems, including AI-based cameras, are being rolled out across fire-prone regions. They scan ridgelines, valleys, and suburban edges for the first sign of smoke. In many cases, the alerts reach fire crews faster than 911 calls, giving responders a precious head start. This artificial watchtower network now acts as a digital layer of surveillance over terrain too vast for patrols alone. Rebuilding scarred landscapes forms another piece of the state's strategy. On Sierra Nevada slopes and across burn zones in Sonoma, crews are planting millions of young trees. The goal is not only ecological recovery, but also to stabilize fragile soil, slow erosion, and restore canopies that moderate future fire intensity. These replanting projects, unprecedented in their size, signal how California now invests directly in reshaping geography after years of devastation-cleared valleys and slopes. The urgency behind these measures comes into sharper focus when looking at recent numbers. Early 2025 fires around Los Angeles caused roughly $65 billion in total losses, including about $40 billion in insured damages. Those figures, among the highest ever recorded, underscore why prevention is no longer optional but foundational to the state's future. Life, however, still reflects the risks. Residents in mountain towns rehearse evacuation plans, aware that a single blocked road could trap thousands. Insurance premiums climb beyond reach, with many homeowners turning to bare-bones state coverage to hold on to their properties. As one local described to reporters, "We're living in a place that feels defended and fragile at the same time." California's prevention work is shaping a new playbook for wildfire-prone places worldwide. The state's shift from reaction to engineered resilience now serves as a reference point for regions confronting fire in a hotter, drier century. And as California adapts by necessity, another state has taken a completely different path to reshape its economic map: Colorado's green gold rush. Colorado may be known for its high peaks and ski towns, but in 2025 another force runs just as deep in the state's identity: cannabis. Legal marijuana has grown into a significant source of tax revenue, not a passing experiment. Sales bring in steady funds that help support programs in education, public health, and infrastructure, giving state officials a dependable stream they can budget around. For Colorado, this is less about novelty and more about a durable industry now written into economic planning. The change shows itself most vividly in small towns. In places like Trinidad and Pueblo, where coal or steel once defined local life, empty warehouses have been converted into greenhouses or cultivation centers. Storefronts that once sat vacant on rural main streets now welcome customers from across the region, creating jobs and giving local governments tax stability that would have seemed unlikely only a generation ago. In many rural counties, cannabis reshaped finances in ways that older industries could not sustain. This shift also alters how the state thinks about geography. Strong economic performance doesn't rely solely on the ski resorts of the Rockies or Denver's urban corridor anymore. Communities scattered along the highways find themselves with dependable revenue because travelers continue arriving for legal purchases. Hotels, restaurants, and service industries cluster around that flow, not only surviving but, in some cases, finally returning to steady growth. Cannabis has become a connector across communities once isolated from statewide prosperity. Equally notable is how the politics of cannabis have changed. In earlier years, debates about legalization were tense and often polarizing. By 2025, conversations look different. State reports frame the industry in the same routine, data-driven tone used for alcohol or fuel sales, focusing more on regulation and less on ideology. Researchers track impacts on issues such as youth access and roadway safety, but the presence of cannabis itself is treated as a given rather than a question. For residents, what once felt like a social experiment has simply become another sector of the economy they rely on. And yet, one question lingers beneath all those numbers. How stable is this revenue over the long run? In county commission meetings, leaders still debate whether growth can continue at current levels, or if dependence on cannabis taxes will leave communities exposed. That uncertainty sends Colorado's story in a different direction, a reminder that even strong industries come with risks. Before we turn to another state where changing population maps now raise their own set of questions. Connecticut's population puzzle. Connecticut's population in 2025 tells a story not of rapid growth, but of where people decide to settle. The most recent data shows the state's overall headcount hasn't shifted dramatically, but the distribution has. Urban cores and transit corridors continue to gain people, while many rural towns steadily lose residents. This balancing act plays out in a state that is geographically small, but already among the nation's most densely settled. What emerges is less a tale of growth than of concentration. Bridgeport, Hartford, and Stamford highlight this trend in different ways. Each has seen stronger demand for in-town housing, whether it's apartment towers near rail stations, campus housing linked to universities and medical centers, or new neighborhoods that grew around commuting links into New York. These cities have grown tighter and busier without carrying the same sprawl seen elsewhere in the country. For Connecticut, urban density has taken the lead role in shaping its demographic map. Rural areas have a very different trajectory. Litchfield and Windham counties continue to report declining enrollment in schools and shrinking populations, forcing some districts to merge or close facilities. Families who might once have stayed in these quieter areas now tend to cluster closer to major highways and job centers. The division is clear. Classrooms in urban corridors fill to capacity, while others in rural towns sit half empty. These changes ripple into transportation planning. Highways along I-95 and I-91 already carry some of the heaviest traffic in the state, yet nearby communities keep adding more residents. Commuter rail shows the same contrast. Stations serving the urban corridor see rising demand, while those set in depopulating towns lose riders. Legislators are often split between reinforcing already crowded infrastructure or trying to redirect growth through incentives. The mismatch between where people live and where access exists keeps planners under constant pressure. Altogether, the state's geography of population looks very different than it did a generation ago. Connecticut is no longer defined only as a corridor between New York and Boston. Its own centers of density carve out weight on the national map, showing what happens when a small state reshapes itself through concentration instead of expansion. It's a reminder that within small states, geography can reconfigure political and transport priorities quickly. Next, we turn from population patterns to another kind of geography, one where a state's true influence is counted not in residents on the ground, but in the documents signed under its name. Delaware's dual identity. Delaware is physically one of the smallest states in the U.S., yet its presence in the world of corporate registrations is immense. By 2025, the state continues to host far more registered companies than it has actual residents. With a population just over 1 million, Delaware counts several times that number in corporate entities on its books. On paper, companies outnumber households by a wide margin, making the state's footprint appear far larger in corporate ledgers than in its day-to-day geography. Most of these corporations will never open an office in Wilmington or build a factory near Dover. For many, the only local evidence of their existence is a mailing address at a legal services firm. What draws them here is not proximity to customers, but the framework of laws and regulations. Delaware's legal and tax structure makes it one of the most attractive places for incorporation in the country. Its court system has a long reputation for handling corporate disputes efficiently, and its tax setup exempts companies operating outside the state from certain obligations. That mix creates an environment where international giants and small startups alike choose Delaware as their legal home. For business leaders, the logic is straightforward. Incorporating in Delaware means access to clear statutes, predictable rulings, and financial advantages compared to other states. The real global headquarters may stand in Silicon Valley or Manhattan, but the paperwork that governs mergers, shareholder rights, or corporate contracts often originates here. That's why company charters from across the US and beyond carry a Delaware address. Yet on the ground, life in Delaware looks nothing like the scale of that financial presence. Local communities contend with the kinds of concerns found in any mid-sized state: road congestion along I-95, pressure on public housing, and budgets shaped by the needs of just over 1 million residents. Filing fees and incorporation revenue support the state's balance sheets, but they don't erase the very real, everyday challenges of small state infrastructure. The wealth generated from corporations registered here doesn't translate into tangible headquarters or thousands of new jobs, leaving Delaware residents with a sense that much of the state's prosperity exists on paper rather than in their neighborhoods. It's a statewide paradox: tiny in population, huge on corporate ledgers. And while Delaware's story plays out in contracts and courtrooms, the next state faces challenges written directly into its environment, where changes arrive not on paper but in rising water. Florida's sinking equation. Florida's challenges in 2025 can be summed up in one phrase: water that won't stay put. Along the coasts, Sea level rise over recent decades has measurably increased how often streets and neighborhoods flood. In a state known as the flattest in the US, with an average elevation of about 100 feet and its highest natural point, Britton Hill, at just 345 feet, this margin for change is razor-thin. Even a modest rise makes a difference, turning once occasional events into routine disruptions for residents. In Miami Beach, sections of roadway now flood with regular tidal peaks rather than rare surges. Local government has poured resources into adaptation projects, including high-capacity pump stations designed to force water back toward Biscayne Bay and interconnected seawalls that shield entire blocks. These upgrades are expensive and complicated, but for now they allow daily life to continue in areas that would otherwise struggle to remain functional. Further up the Gulf Coast, Tampa has pursued a different kind of adjustment. There, the city raised roadways in especially flood-prone neighborhoods, elevating entire stretches several feet to stay level with encroaching tides. It is a blunt but necessary fix, trading higher construction costs for reliable access. Yet in both cities, no one can guarantee how long such measures will hold against the long-term trend of rising seas. The stress shows not just on infrastructure, but on beaches and coastlines. Sand replenishment falls behind as wave action and higher tides strip layers away faster than they can be restored. Some property owners add engineered dunes or barriers to anchor what remains, while counties strengthen building codes for new construction near vulnerable zones. Higher foundations and stricter standards add cost, but without them, large stretches would quickly become uninsurable. Day-to-day life creates another layer of contrast. For tourists, Florida still offers the same picture of sunny beaches and palm-lined roads. For residents, each heavy rain combined with high tide can close key roads or isolate neighborhoods until pumps and crews can respond. Living here means balancing the postcard image with constant calculation. Tide charts on the fridge, storm surge maps in the app drawer, evacuation routes memorized as routine. And yet, property markets continue to surge in coastal Florida. Buyers still pay premiums for ocean views, even as officials warn them about long-term risks. It's a paradox that shows how desire often overrules caution. Would you still buy a coastal view if the map keeps changing? Tell us why or why not. Meanwhile, the next state illustrates a very different transformation. One not measured in tides, but in the unexpected rise of an entirely new kind of industry. Georgia's Hollywood rivalry. If film and television once felt locked to the West Coast, that picture no longer holds true. By 2025, Georgia has positioned itself as one of the top film production hubs in the country, with incentives that encouraged studios to build permanent infrastructure and thousands of workers to treat the state as a base. The industry now drives substantial local employment, steady studio development, and a wave of new business tied directly to film. For a state historically associated with farming and transport corridors, this marks a striking shift in identity. Atlanta stands at the center of this rise. Permanent sound stages line parts of the city, and year-round crews keep projects in constant rotation. The productions range from high-budget blockbusters to streaming service series and lower-budget indies, all finding the same draw. Filming here costs less, and the talent pool is deep enough to deliver. What once required a move to California or New York can now be filmed in Georgia. And that fundamental shift is what places the state in direct rivalry with Hollywood. The impact doesn't stop within city limits. In Fayette County and other nearby areas, entire neighborhoods have reoriented around studio complexes. Warehouses turned into prop houses, offices became casting spaces, and cafes doubled as meeting spots for crews and actors. Small towns that once felt peripheral to the national economy suddenly appear on international screens. For local families, the change isn't abstract. It's steady jobs, rental demand, and a tax base tied less to manufacturing or agriculture and more to global entertainment. This evolution also changes the way outsiders view Georgia. The state no longer markets itself only with peaches, soft drink headquarters, or college football. Instead, it has a growing reputation as an entertainment economy that feeds into tourism and higher education. Film location tours attract visitors to suburban Atlanta, while universities offer new programs designed for production design, animation, and post-production work. Aspiring actors and crew members now migrate south, reshaping workforce demographics in ways that surprise long-time residents. The wider message is clear. Each time a Marvel sequel, a streaming miniseries, or a national commercial sets up cameras in Georgia, the state exports stories the same way it once exported crops. Its position in the media economy has become fixed, not experimental. That blend of cultural output and physical place highlights how a state's geography can remain dynamic. And while Georgia has reshaped its landscape through industry, the next example reveals a geography that is still being built by nature itself. Hawaii's growing land. Hawaii remains unique as the only U.S. state where land is still visibly being created. On the Big Island, volcanic activity continues to add new acreage in real time. Eruptions from Kilauea and Mauna Loa, even in recent years, have sent slow-moving lava toward the coast, where molten rock hardens on contact with the Pacific. Each new flow extends the island outward, with property boundaries, maps, and navigation charts adjusting to reflect the changes. The pace is real and measurable. Research estimates that the Big Island grows by about 42 acres per year as eruptions expand the coastline. That growth comes with trade-offs. Some long-used beaches vanish beneath black rock, while brand-new black sand stretches appear in their place. Officials tasked with mapping shorelines face a never-ending job, as land that was ocean a season ago becomes solid ground a season later. At the same time, erosion and higher sea levels steadily eat away at other coastlines. Depending on where you stand, Hawaii is either expanding or shrinking, a paradox that defines daily life on the islands. Tourism brings more pressure to this system. By 2025, visitor numbers have approached pre-pandemic peaks, and volcano viewing remains a top draw. To balance safety with demand, the state built elevated platforms near Kilauea's recovery zone, giving visitors a clear view without putting them on unstable ground. For many travelers, watching glowing lava or steaming craters is unforgettable. For communities, it also means managing air quality problems, rerouted roads, and the risks of building near unpredictable terrain. For residents, new land is both an opportunity and a disruption. Geological creation captures worldwide fascination, yet the same process can destroy homes, cut off utilities, and force costly rebuilding. The cultural perspective adds another dimension. In Hawaiian tradition, volcanic activity is understood through the figure of Pele, the volcano goddess, whose presence is seen not as a scientific process, but as a living force shaping the islands. That layer of meaning deepens the connection between people, place, and the landscapes that continue to evolve around them. Hawaii's geography stands apart because it is still being written. Its borders are not static lines on a map, but active margins shaped by fire and ocean. Hawaii is one of the few places on Earth where the map literally gains new pixels each year. And as one state contends with its land growing beneath its feet, the next shows how identity can stretch in an entirely different direction. Idaho beyond potatoes. Idaho carries a long reputation for agriculture, but in 2025 that picture has shifted well beyond potatoes. The state has emerged as an unexpected draw for technology development in the interior West. Boise, already Idaho's largest metropolitan area, has grown quickly in recent years, with Idaho itself ranked among the states posting the highest percentage population increases nationally. Office parks and residential districts now stretch past the established downtown core, replacing fields and ranchland with corridors of economic activity. Cost remains a major reason companies turned their attention to Idaho. Compared with California, both land and commercial space are far cheaper, lowering the barrier for new campuses or expansion projects. Reliable energy from hydro and wind facilities, combined with improved digital infrastructure, added to the appeal. What this looks like in practice is straightforward. Server farms and fiber lines are now part of the rural skyline just outside Boise, connecting the area to national and global networks without carrying the overhead of coastal cities. The surge has consequences for everyday life. Housing in Ada and Canyon counties has grown more expensive as demand outruns supply. Properties that just a few years earlier rented at modest rates now sit at levels approaching major metros in the West, frustrating long-time residents who had counted on affordability as a point of stability. Traffic backups on commuter routes show the same pressure, with roads designed for smaller populations now clogged at peak hours. The adjustments ripple into school districts as well, where enrollment has risen more quickly than new facilities can be built. This trade-off highlights how growth that fuels opportunity can also stretch existing infrastructure. Officials walk a line between approving new development to sustain momentum and protecting farmland and open space from being built over. The debate is no longer about whether Idaho will grow, but about how the state will absorb that growth without losing the physical and cultural landscapes that shaped its identity in the first place. On a cultural level, the contrast becomes visible in everyday drives. A 10-minute trip may carry you from rows of potatoes to a glass-fronted data facility, reflecting how traditional and new economies sit side by side. The gem state title, once tied mainly to natural resources, now also extends to code, data, and cloud platforms. Idaho's map is being redrawn not by boundaries, but by the industries that increasingly define its future. That momentum sets up a striking contrast, because the next stop shifts to a state where population and economic patterns are moving in the opposite direction. Illinois losing its core. Chicago shows the look of constant motion. Busy streets, new construction, and streams of commuters filling trains and freeways. Yet the rest of Illinois tells a very different story. The state continues to experience population decline and steady out-migration, trends that have become more visible over the past decade. What was once a slow background shift has turned into a defining feature of Illinois' demographic profile in 2025. The downturn hits hardest in rural counties. In central and southern Illinois, main streets are marked by shuttered businesses, schools consolidating students into fewer buildings, and hospitals merging or closing altogether. Residents in many towns travel farther for basic services, and the daily signs of contraction are unavoidable. With fewer people spread across large areas, maintaining infrastructure becomes problematic. Roads, utilities, and public spaces cost just as much to keep up, yet the tax base to pay for them keeps thinning. The imbalance leaves rural Illinois increasingly undersupplied next to the stable suburban zones still tied to Chicago's orbit. Suburban towns near the Chicago metro remain the state's clearer point of contrast. These communities hold steady thanks to commuter links and job centers that continue to attract families. New subdivisions appear on the edges, and retail corridors still see consistent activity. But the relative stability here cannot cover for declines across most of the state. The wider pattern shows one region able to maintain its numbers while others steadily weaken. This uneven reality is magnified by Illinois' built environment. Decades of investment into highways, utilities, and transit assumed a larger population than the one that exists today. Now, those systems must still be maintained at their design scale without the benefit of matching revenue. Cities operate sewer networks sized for growth that never arrived, while counties keep up wide stretches of road that carry fewer drivers each year. The result is a constant mismatch between what has been built and what is still required. Illinois' shrinking base places direct strain on public finances. Fewer residents mean declining property and income tax collections, even as major expenses remain locked in place. pension obligations, school systems, and public safety costs cannot simply disappear, leaving state leaders faced with rising demands and fewer resources to balance them. Illinois is now a cautionary example of how outmigration reshapes infrastructure needs and budgets, showing in real time the complications that unfold when a state's population contracts. Against that backdrop of decline, the next state demonstrates a different outcome, one where long-standing industries are being refitted to define the economy's future. Indiana's factory map. Indiana has long carried the title Crossroads of America, but in 2025 that meaning stretches beyond highways. The state also sits at the heart of America's changing factory map, where its role as a manufacturing hub continues to grow even as some regions lose industry. Large-scale investments in electric vehicle battery plants now anchor this resurgence. These facilities build components for EVs as well as battery systems used for energy storage, ensuring Indiana plays a central role in both transportation and renewable power. With each new project, thousands of roles open during construction and operation, reinforcing the state's identity as a place defined by production. The construction of these plants has transformed economic corridors around Indianapolis and across central counties. Sites once tied to steel or traditional auto parts now host advanced machinery aligned with 21st century needs. This continuity is striking. Indiana remains an automotive state, but what it makes and how it makes it have evolved. For workers, the change feels like walking familiar ground with new tools. Union halls hold discussions about retraining, and families accustomed to generations of factory life witness younger members entering plants run by software, robotics, and high-capacity equipment rather than assembly lines of bolts and welds. Not every part of the state benefits equally. The metropolitan centers with research universities, strong highway links, and logistics hubs capture most of the investment. These areas show rising wages, growing subdivisions, and more demand for schools and housing. By contrast, many rural counties remain tied to smaller operations, where automation pressures jobs and foreign competition continues to weigh on margins. The gap between growth corridors and struggling factory towns underscores the challenge of spreading prosperity throughout Indiana. This divide raises a broader question about strategy. State leaders face the need to protect a century-old industrial base while also cultivating the sectors that will define the future. Combustion engine plants, steel shops, and machine works still employ many, while new EV facilities and green energy manufacturers signal what lies ahead. Managing both systems without undermining either requires careful planning, balancing tradition with transition. The movement of goods reflects these changes too. Freight rail and highway corridors carry rising volumes from these new plants, prompting expansions that embed industry even deeper into the geography of the state. In short, Indiana is marrying its manufacturing DNA to the green transition, promising jobs, but also new challenges. The Midwest story of factories reshaping landscapes takes another form just next door. Iowa's renewable fields. Iowa is often pictured as a patchwork of corn and soybean fields, but by 2025 it holds another distinction. The state has become one of the nation's leaders in renewable electricity, with wind energy in particular reshaping its landscape and power supply. Instead of relying heavily on distant fossil fuel plants, many Iowa communities now draw directly from local turbines and solar fields tied into the grid. For schools, homes, and businesses, it means everyday power increasingly comes from equipment visible right outside town. Travel across central and western Iowa, and the change is clear. Turbines line horizons for miles, their white blades rising above barns and silos. Among the rows of corn and beans, towers the land so consistently that they feel like part of the scenery, as common as water towers or grain elevators once were. Solar installations add another layer, with wide fields of panels reflecting the sky across rural counties. Drivers along major highways notice immediately. Agriculture and electricity now share the same ground. Farmers remain central to this transformation. Many lease land to energy developers, creating an additional income stream without giving up crop production entirely. A single turbine might occupy only a sliver of acreage, allowing corn or soybeans to grow right up to its base, while some solar sites are arranged so livestock can graze between arrays. This dual use of land has allowed Iowans to produce food and electricity side by side, strengthening the rural economy while diversifying its output. But the expansion does not come without tension. Communities continue to debate how much farmland should be devoted to energy projects, and local boards weigh contracts against concerns about losing prime cropland. Some residents see renewables as stability in an uncertain commodity market, while others fear a gradual erosion of the state's agricultural identity. Disputes over zoning and setbacks now appear as frequently in small-town meetings as traditional debates about subsidies or trade. The broader picture is clear. Iowa is no longer defined solely by the crops rooted in its soil. It now stands as a frontier of renewable energy, sustaining both food systems and electricity for millions across the Midwest. That balance between tradition and adjustment reshapes the state's place on the national map, while just west, another agricultural state faces a different challenge altogether, not producing more power, but finding ways to withstand the pressures of a changing climate. Kansas in climate stress. Kansas stands at the center of America's grain belt, yet in 2025 its farming heartland shows how climate pressure is reshaping the map. Wheat, the state's signature crop, faces hotter summers, drier weeks, and stress at critical growth points. For farmers long accustomed to routine planting, the new reality demands adaptation. Unpredictable conditions push both small and large operations toward practices that conserve water and protect yields, even if that means rethinking methods passed down for generations. Irrigation illustrates this shift most clearly. Instead of the sweeping sprays and flood systems that once dominated western Kansas, more fields now use drip lines or low-pressure sprinklers designed to cut evaporation. Farmers rely on soil sensors to plan watering in real time, squeezing maximum benefit from every drop pumped from aquifers already running low after decades of depletion. The sight of laptops guiding pivots has replaced some of the older visual markers of the plains, showing how agriculture merges tradition with technology to survive heat and drought. Seed research offers another layer of resilience. New wheat hybrids bred to withstand extended hot spells and inconsistent rainfall are spreading across Kansas acreage. These strains aim to steady yields even as weather swings outside historical norms. For a region that supplies grain well beyond its borders, consistency matters. When Kansas fields falter, the effects reach bakeries, export terminals, and food prices across the United States and abroad. The adaptation decisions made here ripple outward into national food security. Yet, the challenges extend beyond the crops. Rural areas of the state continue to lose population as younger residents seek opportunities elsewhere, leaving schools with declining enrollment and town centers with fewer businesses. At the same time, parts of western Kansas have found new economic traction through renewable energy. Rows of turbines now rise above farmland, and solar installations sit alongside wheat fields. These projects add income streams and employment, though they do not fully replace the economic scale of traditional farming. For many communities, they provide just enough stability to slow decline. Kansas in 2025 is a state caught between immense productivity and immense strain. Farmers push forward with new tools, but each harvest season tests whether adaptation can keep pace with shifting conditions. The future of Kansas wheat will help determine the stability of American grain supplies, making its climate response a national concern. And while Kansas grapples with its land and weather, another state is drawing international attention by centering its identity around a celebrated product of its own: Kentucky's bourbon boom. Kentucky's bourbon industry has moved far beyond heritage branding, By 2025, it stands as one of the state's central economic engines. What was once considered a southern specialty has become a major export, fueling distillery expansion and tourism, while tying Kentucky's name to shelves and bars around the world. Shipments leaving through Louisville's airports and river terminals underline how deeply this spirit has embedded itself in international trade. Growth has reached areas well beyond the biggest names. While established producers remain dominant, new distilleries and warehouses now rise in smaller counties where farming once set the only pace. Communities like Crestwood, Danville, and especially those near Bardstown have seen farmland give way to rickhouses holding tens of thousands of barrels. For locals, that means work not just in distilling but in trucking, storage, and packaging. Agriculture and industry overlap here, with corn and grain fields turning directly into contracts that connect rural land to global markets. Tourism now matches that industrial surge. The so-called Bourbon trails, linking Louisville, Bardstown, and Lexington report record visitation, with buses running year-round between tasting rooms and visitor centers. Visitors are eager to see how grain transforms into whiskey and to link the experience of Kentucky's hills with its bottles. Hotels, restaurants, and local shops along these routes benefit from waves of travelers. For rural counties, tourism has moved from a side activity to an indispensable part of local economies, directly tied to the rise of the Bourbon brand. The geography of this boom is impossible to miss. Long warehouses known as rickhouses now line once quiet stretches of highway, their windows venting the unmistakable aroma of yeast and oak. Driving a county road, it's common to pass one after another, each holding thousands of barrels quietly aging. That physical presence reshapes Kentucky's countryside, layering rows of wooden structures across landscapes more often associated with crops and pastureland. For farmers, the trade has clear benefits. Distilleries generate steady demand for grain, anchoring agricultural revenue in global commerce. In a sense, bourbon has become Kentucky's passport, connecting rolling hills to distant liquor markets and placing the state firmly in the global spotlight. But while barrels here mark growth and expansion, other places in America face the opposite problem. Boundaries not building outward, but wearing away beneath the weight of water. Louisiana's race against water. Louisiana's coast stands as one of the most rapidly changing landscapes in the country, and in 2025 that transformation feels unmistakable. After decades of steady land loss, some of the most ambitious restoration projects ever attempted are now visible, showing results that locals can point to with cautious optimism. Instead of only tracking erosion, state agencies now report measurable gains. New marsh areas built through engineered restoration on a scale once considered impossible. Billions of dollars in investment have shifted the outlook from inevitable retreat toward a slower, more managed reshaping of the map. Sediment dredged from the Mississippi and Atchafalaya rivers is now pumped into shallow basins where marsh plants quickly establish themselves. Shorebirds return, fish nurseries strengthen, and irregular land patches begin to knit back together into wetlands. What began as experiments decades ago now functions at industrial scale, with dredging and planting cycles repeating year after year. For scientists and residents, the difference is visible. Areas that were once open water now show stretches of green. These gains may not outweigh the long losses, but they provide proof that rebuilding land remains possible. Barrier islands remain another essential piece of defense. Restoration teams continue to rebuild stretches such as Whiskey Island and Caminada Headland by depositing sand from offshore dredges. These chains of raised dunes blunt the first impact of storm surges before they strike communities farther inland. Yet storms remain relentless, and major hurricanes can undo years of progress in a single weekend. The work never truly ends. Each restoration cycle competes against the sea's steady push. The hardest decisions still fall on residents of low-lying parishes like Plaquemines, where day-to-day life collides with long-term survival. Repeated flooding forces some families to weigh relocation against the cost of staying. Fishing jobs and oil work still provide a living, but both rely on fragile marshes that grow smaller each decade. Moving inland often means abandoning not only homes but the fabric of a culture built around water, leaving residents with the toughest calculation of all: defend traditions in place, or start again in unfamiliar territory. New Orleans faces its own perpetual test. Levees, pumps, and drainage systems now confront heavy rainfall and storm surges almost every year, requiring maintenance and upgrades just to maintain a working status quo. The city lives in constant rehearsal for the next test, embodying both resilience and exposure in equal measure. Louisiana's map is changing every year, and that tension between erosion and renewal sets the stage for the environmental challenges faced in other coastal regions further north. Maine's lobster shift. Maine's coastline tells a story in 2025 shaped as much by warming seas as by tradition. Lobsters remain the state's signature catch, but where they can be found is changing. As Gulf of Maine waters trend warmer, lobsters are moving north, altering where the biggest hauls come in. For fishermen in southern ports, the shift shows up in lighter traps, while harbors closer to the Canadian border continue to report fuller catches. Success no longer depends only on effort, it is increasingly a matter of geography. This trend does not mean Maine's lobster population is disappearing. Instead, the distribution of catch has stretched northward, favoring towns like Stonington and Jonesport while leaving more southern docks with thinner yields. Boats that once delivered a steady supply along the entire coast now face a moving line of abundance. The industry's foundation still holds, but it is less predictable than it was even a decade ago. What does this mean for the lobster roll on your plate? The supply chain is already adjusting. Tourism continues to anchor the state's cultural calendar, with lobster festivals, seaside cookouts, and parades drawing visitors every summer. To travelers, the image of Maine lobster feels unchanged, yet behind the scenes, fishermen and scientists are working together under new conditions. Research programs track water temperature, salinity, and migration routes, while community meetings often include marine biologists sharing results with local crews. These collaborations help coastal towns respond more quickly to climate-driven changes, blurring the old lines between tradition and science. Diversification has also become a practical hedge. Shellfish farms raising oysters, scallops, and mussels give small harbors additional income when lobster hauls fluctuate. These operations take up stretches of shoreline once dedicated only to wild catch and provide new roles for younger workers who might otherwise leave fishing behind. For towns where lobster is less reliable, aquaculture acts as a buffer, securing a measure of stability against changing waters. The challenge now lies in balancing demand with shifting supply. Restaurants, export markets, and tourists still count on Maine for lobster, but how much of that demand can be met depends on where the species settles and how fast alternative ventures can fill the gaps. Maine remains America's lobster hub, but the long-term outlook may bring a different distribution of both its harvest and its identity. As Maine adjusts to environmental pressures shaping its most famous fishery, another state faces its own reckoning with the waters that define it. Maryland's Bay comeback. For decades, the Chesapeake Bay was known as the most polluted estuary in the United States. By 2025, however, Maryland can point to visible progress. Years of restoration projects have begun to shift the story away from decline and toward cautious recovery. The bay remains fragile, but new data shows measurable improvements felt both in local ecosystems and in the lives of the people who depend on them. Oysters are at the center of this comeback. Once devastated by overfishing and disease, they are now returning in greater numbers thanks to large-scale reef building. In the Patuxent and Choptank rivers, new reefs serve as anchors for restored populations. Oysters filter the water naturally, clearing the way for underwater grasses to regrow along shorelines. In turn, Those grasses stabilize sediments, improve clarity, and provide shelter for young fish and crabs. The chain reaction is clear. More oysters mean cleaner water. Cleaner water means more seagrass, and more seagrass means healthier fisheries. For boating and fishing communities around the bay, these changes are visible. Areas where seagrasses had nearly vanished now show green growth underwater. Fishermen who once feared collapse now report signs of rebound in blue crabs, striped bass, and other commercial catches. Only a decade and a half ago, forecasts warned that entire fisheries might fail. Today, recovery is tangible, measured not just in reports, but in filled traps and dockside sales. Progress has also come from tackling the root causes of pollution. Baltimore expanded stormwater systems and upgraded sewage infrastructure, slashing the amount of nutrient runoff flowing into the harbor. At the same time, farmers upstream planted cover crops and added buffer strips along waterways to keep fertilizers and sediments from feeding Chesapeake algal blooms. The connection between urban repairs and rural conservation underlines how restoring the bay depends on cooperation across the entire watershed, not just one community. The results are modest compared to the bay's historical abundance, but they represent a real reversal of fortune. Cleaner water, re-established grasses, and a recovering oyster population show what is possible when restoration happens at scale. For longtime residents who watched continual decline, this shift marks the first hopeful signs in generations. Maryland's Chesapeake is now a rare example of a U.S. waterway where intensive restoration has turned the tide of long-term loss. That success, while still fragile, demonstrates that major ecological recovery can be achieved, with lessons that extend far beyond state lines. And from here, attention moves to a different kind of growth story, one centered not on waters or wildlife, but on an industry reshaping an entire state's economy. Massachusetts biotech surge. Boston's reputation as an academic capital still stands strong, but in 2025 Massachusetts also leads the nation in something more immediate: its surge in biotechnology. Billions in research spending and private investment have poured into the state, remaking its economy around labs, clinical facilities, and biomedical innovation. At the core of this boom is Kendall Square in Cambridge, now one of the densest concentrations of life sciences activity anywhere in the world. University research clusters here intersect with global pharmaceutical companies, producing a steady stream of patents, trials, and startups that keeps the district expanding year after year. The scale of change is most visible in the state's labor profile, where textiles, fishing, or even finance once anchored middle-class careers. Massachusetts now creates high-wage roles in research and development. Biologists, biomedical engineers, and clinical trial managers make up positions that pay far above the state average. For many students graduating from its universities, the path to work no longer leads far from campus. It leads directly into nearby laboratories. This steady shift reshapes not only the economy, but also the long-standing idea of Massachusetts as a place defined primarily by education. Today, education feeds directly into employment pipelines that supply one of the most advanced industries in the U.S. Although Cambridge dominates the narrative, the reach extends well beyond Boston. Secondary hubs in Worcester and Springfield now support satellite labs, medical device plants, and specialized manufacturing that spread the benefits of biotech across the state. These cities gain new job clusters without the astronomical costs of Cambridge real estate, while still tapping into the same streams of university talent and supply chains. In Worcester especially, whole neighborhoods have seen research facilities integrated into old manufacturing corridors, making biotech a driver of regional identity well outside Greater Boston. The physical geography of the state reflects the pace of growth. Suburban towns once shaped by single-family housing are now ringed by large research complexes employing hundreds of specialists. Transit projects have been accelerated to link new residential areas to laboratory campuses, while highways carry steady commuter flows between suburbs and the biotech core. What was once a localized research district has widened into a system where infrastructure, housing, and innovation are interdependent. Taken together, these shifts show a state that transitioned into a science-driven economy more quickly and more thoroughly than most of its peers. Massachusetts' future now rests in the laboratories shaping global medicine, with an industrial identity far different from its past. From here, the focus turns westward, where another state with a long manufacturing legacy is confronting its own turning point. Michigan going electric. In 2025, Michigan's auto industry carries the weight of both its past and its future. For more than a century, factories in the state defined car production through gasoline engines and assembly lines that employed generations. Today, many of those same plants run under redesigned layouts, producing batteries and electric vehicles on a scale large enough to anchor the nation's electrification push. The change is not slow or tentative. It is rapid, propelled by billions in investment meant to keep American cars competitive worldwide. Michigan remains central to the industry, but under rules rewritten for an electric age. Detroit and the surrounding counties show the most vivid evidence of this shift. Facilities that once stamped engine blocks or built transmissions have become gigafactories turning out lithium-ion batteries and electric SUVs. General Motors, Ford, and Stellantis all use Michigan as a hub for new output, betting that retooling here secures their place in the next generation of car making. Old equipment came out, new lines went in, and whole plants were rearranged to suit EV production rather than combustion engines. These rebuilt factories position Michigan to remain the largest source of domestically produced electric vehicles. But the transformation brings complications as well as opportunities. Advanced automation now runs much of the precision assembly and quality control. Robots guide welds, align batteries, and handle inspections once done by human hands. While construction phases and retraining programs created thousands of opportunities, the long-term picture raises hard questions. Will permanent employment stabilize at levels that sustain the towns surrounding these plants, or will machines carry more of the work? Union halls echo with that tension, and families who lived off auto wages for generations continue to ask what security looks like in a digital factory. For communities like Dearborn and Lansing, the revival of plants still feels like a relief compared to closure. Suppliers, tool shops, and logistics companies benefit from renewed activity, and local officials present EV production as proof the state can reinvent itself again. At the same time, many residents note that the guarantee of steady auto work, the promise that built suburbs and schools in the 20th century, no longer feels certain. Optimism and unease now sit side by side along Michigan's industrial corridors. The lesson Michigan offers is direct. Constant reinvention is the only way to remain relevant in manufacturing. Would you move to Michigan if your job were in EV production? What happens when a state's identity isn't tied to factories, but to natural resources instead? Minnesota's water math. Minnesota's defining feature in 2025 is not farmland or factories, but its staggering inventory of fresh water. The motto "Land of 10,000 Lakes" still appears on license plates, yet updated surveys now show the number runs far higher, around 11,842 distinct lakes across the state. The difference comes from modern mapping tools. High-resolution satellites and refined watershed studies identified small and seasonal lakes that earlier counts missed. While 10,000 remains iconic, the revised figure underlines how central water continues to be to Minnesota's geography. Abundance alone does not guarantee health. Recent monitoring highlights phosphorus-driven algal blooms as a serious threat, clouding waters and stressing native fish. In the state's southern belt, where agriculture dominates, several lakes now close during summer months due to algae outbreaks. Contrast that with northern chains near the boundary waters, where clearer forests filter runoff and canoe routes still thrive as they have for generations. Visitors in that region often remark that paddling among pristine waters feels like stepping into an older version of the Midwest. The boundary waters also carry a strong human dimension. Outfitters report packed schedules as demand for paddling trips remains steady, and families continue to book rustic cabins or campsites year after year. One canoe guide described the rush of tourism in a recent summer as the busiest season I've ever seen. These stories remind locals that beyond statistics, lakes remain anchors of cultural identity and seasonal livelihoods across northern Minnesota. Yet even the healthiest chains of water systems are not immune. Researchers tracking nutrient loads in Voyageurs National Park find signs of stress at levels once absent. That tension between resilience and vulnerability runs throughout the state, affecting decisions in city halls, farm boards, and rural councils. Communities near farm belts invest in wastewater upgrades and work with watershed districts to create buffer zones of native vegetation along shorelines. Volunteers plant barriers that reduce erosion, proving that local management choices matter in the fight to preserve water quality. Tourism remains strong, with anglers chasing walleye and vacationers spreading out to cabin rentals year-round. Minnesota's geography still markets itself with ease, but the promise of pristine blue waters depends on ongoing effort. Each lake, whether newly mapped or long celebrated, carries the dual weight of natural beauty and human responsibility. That balance between managing resources and sustaining livelihoods frames challenges that other states are confronting too, though with very different kinds of economic pressures. Mississippi's economy reshaped. Mississippi in 2025 is reshaping its economy with a push to diversify beyond its farm base. The state is investing in new industry and upgrading its Gulf Coast ports to handle larger shipping routes. These projects are supported by workforce training programs, especially in technical fields where demand is rising. Together, the investments and training aim to give younger workers opportunities that once felt scarce within the state. Yet deep contrasts remain. Rural regions continue to face entrenched poverty, while select corridors accelerate with new industries. Geography here acts as both an obstacle and a springboard shaping Mississippi's future. Be sure to watch Part 2, where we cover the craziest things happening in the remaining 25 United States of America.